Hey YouTube, doing some more interview prep today. I am going over some of my notes again, and I remembered pretty good one. I don't remember if I talked about this last time, but the scoped singleton transient when you're adding the services like dependency injection to middleware and .NET Core. You've got a few ways to do it. Transient scope singleton. Transient is essentially the like everything is different. So every controller that gets a dependency injected into it has a different instance of that that interface or that mapping. So let's say it's a database or whatever. It's got one instance in controller one and a different instance in controller two. Scoped would be similar, except it takes it at the call level. So let's say they make a call into your app, and it creates the instance, and then for the life of that call, it every instance is the same. So you might have controller one and controller two with the same instance of that database call. And then singleton would be it lasts for the lifetime of the app. So you have call one, call two, controller one, controller two, every call, same instance of the database dependency that's injected into everything until the app dies and restarts again. That one I've been hit with probably a couple times in interviews. In reality, I don't know. I don't know how really important that is. I mean, with some apps and stuff, of course, some of those patterns are really important. But on a day-to-day basis, I can't think of really a good example where I would say, oh yeah, you really need to use transient in this case, and then a singleton in this case. There may be some performance or security reason or something that's specific to the company, but I don't know. That's kind of shooting off the cuff of what I can think of where it might be useful. But I'm sure somebody has good reasons for picking between these. Be happy to hear what you have to say about that. Um, so other than that, I've been looking at refreshing myself on AWS. AWS I've been using since 2019 or so. Use Lambdas probably more than anything else. Lambdas can be they're neat, but they can be restricting when you get to prod and you realize some of the limitations that they've got, and the costs involved as well. But the basic idea is you have an event driven. That's a key factor of these lambdas is they're event driven. So you've got to have something that triggers the lambda, right? And this AI actually ChatGPT. I thought I used DeepSeek. Of course, ChatGPT gave an excellent answer, which it consistently does. So I'm not surprised. But examples of services in these that can trigger those events or be tied to those events are like S3 and API Gateway. The one I use the most is right here, API Gateway. So the API Gateway, you have your API all mapped out, right, in AWS. And then when you make that call, say you HTTP post some endpoint that's the API Gateway endpoint, and then you map that API Gateway endpoint on your post to some specific Lambda that you created, and you do all that mapping inside of AWS, which I don't have an account to show all that right now, but I'm just doing that by memory. And that's probably as important or as deep as you might go in an interview. Now, Lambdas do have a thing, though. I can't remember what it's called, but I had to deal with an issue with the Lambdas where they were, it was like scoping or something. Oh man, I can't remember. But it was a really tricky issue, and I feel like that could be an interesting discussion and interview. If I can think of that, I'll talk about it in a later live stream. All right. Other than that, what else have I looked at here? Refresh myself a little bit on backgrounding services. You got I-hosted service, background service, allows a weight of a task, a longer running. I-hosted lifecycle service replaced the I-hosted service in .NET 8. Looked at my Angular stuff. My next interview, I'm not expecting Angular that much, so I'm not going super deep on Angular, just kind of refreshing myself since I haven't done it in 8 months or so on the job. But I've done Angular for a very, very long time, so I know it well enough where if they start hitting me with stuff, it'll probably come back to me, especially since I've looked at my notes a bit. RxJS can get really tricky and in depth, so if they nail me with that, I'd probably start messing it up. But I hope they don't, because they don't use Angular at the job, so it would be kind of weird if they did. Let's see. And like I said, I do want to look at React, and I want to do GitHub Pages React deployment like I did with my Angular deployment. I'm just not prioritizing that right now because this role, they're not expecting me to know any useful React. Last time I did it in 2016 or whatever, 2015, 2014, 15. That stuff's probably so out of date now, it doesn't help me that much. But the concepts are similar. I've done MFE's micro front end architecture. It's sort of a microservice mindset for the front end. So you're breaking up parts of the front end into different like application domains or app boundaries, memory boundaries. So you end up with some issues if you've got to share data across boundaries, like marshalling in C#, marshalling across app boundaries. You have similar issues if you need to share data across different parts of your microservice. So let's say you create a microservice for page 1, like your employee page, and then you have a microservice for page 2, which is, I don't know, your product search page. If your employee page needs to talk to your product search page, you might consider not doing those two as two different microservices. Maybe just combine them into a single micro front end. I say microservice, micro front end, or MFE. So then they don't have to deal with that talking issue where you've got to create something in the background to communicate between the two. So normally you might create a service. If you're in Angular and you talk across two totally different disconnected boundaries, you could have a service and talk to both. But in MFE, you've got another layer of abstraction, another boundary, and you've got to create something else to marshal that data across now that app boundary. And then at scale, that becomes a problem. So if all your MFEs really need to intercommunicate with each other, like some sort of a broadcast type thing, if you think like more of a chat room type deal, where every app is like, oh yeah, there's a broadcast of a new file, and every app needs to process that file. MFE is probably not even a good fit for your application, for your company at that. It's like the worst use case, and where I would argue maybe don't use MFEs in that case. Yes, you gain some advantage of deployments, and you can kind of architect things differently across MFE, which is a whole nother problem. I don't like that idea. I don't like the idea of Team 1 saying, oh yeah, we're going to have our own architecture that's totally different from Team 2's architecture. I think there should be some consistency. So I don't necessarily view that as a strength. Resolving problems is not a good thing usually, and you've got enough issues to deal with at the business level, especially if you're not working for, say, Facebook or something. Facebook would probably have you split off into a React team. So the React team is working on React. They're not working on React, and also working on Facebook Marketplace. Hopefully, that would be quite a mess. You'd have different backlogs competing with for priority with each other, and the teams wouldn't would cross functional teams probably wouldn't work. There's all kinds of issues. So I would expect a company like Facebook or Microsoft would not put themselves into that situation to begin with. But that happens a lot in the other worlds, the non-IT companies. So it's something I try to avoid. I try to talk companies out of getting themselves into maintaining something they don't want to maintain for years, and they don't want to have competing backlogs. And so anyways, use the stuff that's out there if you can. If simple answer, if you can use React, then use it. Don't build something else that's just like React just to pad your resume. That's not cool, and it doesn't do the company any favors. So anyways, I'll get off my soap bucket there. Other things. Let's see. That's probably about most of what I've looked at today. These keyed. Oh yeah, I was looking at these keyed services. These are interesting. I saw examples of them, but didn't really see a good use case. What's the basic use case for a DI? This thing nailed it. The key DI. Sorry, not DI. Key DIs are a new feature in .NET 8. I think I looked over them or forgot about them, but it's pretty neat because you can take multiple implementations of the same service type and differentiate them using a key. Okay, that's cool. So then they give an example of where that might actually be useful. If you have two different database providers, SQL and MongoDB, then that makes sense. You've got two interfaces here. iNotification service is the example they give, or IDB service could be it, and then you'd have the SQL implementation here and the Mongo implementation here with different keys, SQL, Mongo, and that way in your specific controllers, wherever you can inject the one that you actually need. So injecting a keyed service, they say how that actually works. You have this from keyed service, and it selects with the email, and notification service is right there. So it injects that and then sends the one that's constructed with the keyed service using email, which is email notification service as opposed to SMS notification service. So you build this data structure here to use the keys. So anyway, that was pretty cool. You don't have to create two interfaces that are really kind of the same, and just to satisfy your DI. All right, that's about as much interesting stuff as I have to talk about right now. Have a good one.